been around 2 months since my last Reddit mysteries video, so I thought it was about time that I did another. Today we'll discuss 3 different mysteries, 2 of which are pretty dark, but they're all pretty fascinating regardless. If you enjoy mysteries, true crime, disappearances and conspiracies, feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for more content like this. I also have a Patreon and a PayPal, so if you're interested in supporting the channel, I'll leave a link to those in the description. A few days ago, a post was made on the Reddit Bureau of Investigation subreddit titled, "What could have been the reason why someone operated on my dog?" To summarise the post, OP lives alone in a suburban area that they describe as pretty safe, and when they go out, they leave their Labrador in the backyard. When they returned home from work one day, they noticed that their dog had been operated on. There were visible wounds on his abdomen area and his fur had been shaved. OP took the dog to the vet, who realised fat had been removed for some reason, but all the organs were intact. They couldn't work out why anyone would do this, but they said that whoever did a pretty good job. The vet and the receptionist did not remember the dog, or any Labrador for that matter, coming into the vets that day, leading OP to believe someone operated on the dog themselves, or took him to a different vet. They called other vets in the area, but none recalled operating on a dog of that type, so they reported the incident to the police. Thankfully, the dog will be okay. He'll be in pain for a few weeks because of the wounds, but he should make a full recovery. Which is the main thing that matters, but what the hell happened? This is not only bizarre, but terrifying. Imagine coming back from work one day to find that your dog's been operated on for some unknown reason. OP stated that they don't have any enemies and can't think of anyone who would do that, but even if they did have enemies, why would someone do that? Sadly, it's not unheard of for people to use pets to get back at people, but this would be such a weird way to go about it. Whoever it was could have kidnapped the dog and demanded a ransom, or they could have really hurt the dog if they wanted, just to spite OP, but instead they just performed a seemingly pointless operation. I feel so sorry for the dog because that must have been such a scary experience for him, but even though it'll take a little while to heal, he'll be okay. So what was the point of any of this? If it was a warning of some kind, you'd think there'd be a note or something to make that clear. One theory was that someone hit him with their car, or maybe another dog attacked him and they just took him to a vet's to get treatment and then brought him back. That would explain why there's no note. If someone was driving irresponsibly or their dog just lost it and attacked this dog, it makes sense why they wouldn't want to admit it if they didn't want to get into trouble and they didn't want their own dog putting down. But there are a couple of things wrong with those theories. Firstly, the dog doesn't tend to jump over stuff such as fences, and no neighbours saw the dog outside of the yard, so it does seem very unlikely that he managed to get out onto the road or anywhere near another dog. One of the neighbours has CCTV and police analysed the footage and didn't find anything to explain what might have happened. The fact that he was in the yard when OP returned suggests that either something happened in the yard or that something happened outside of the yard if the dog did manage to get out, but the person who was responsible or involved in some way knew the dog or recognised him and knew where he lived and returned him. It's plausible that another dog got into the yard and that those 2 dogs had a fight, but again, neighbours saw or heard nothing, and there were no injuries to indicate that the dog might have actually been in a fight. There were no bruises or broken bones or anything like that, and there was also not a significant amount of blood in the area either. The timeline is strange too. OP was gone at work for 5 hours, maybe a little longer in total if you factor in travel time, etc. But it's a relatively short amount of time for something to happen in, for the dog to get operated on and returned all in that time that may have been 5 or 6 hours. This led some users to wonder if whoever took the dog was a vet themselves and performed the operation themselves, or even a human doctor without specialised knowledge of animals. Some comments even suggested that the vet who OP took the dog to might have been the vet who performed the operation. It was pointed out that the stitches don't actually look that great. I mean, it's not a bad job, better than I could do, but it's not particularly good either. Maybe the vet said it was good work because it was his work. That's definitely a lot further into speculation though, and there's no solid evidence to show that that might have been what happened. Another theory is that a medical student might have been using the dog to practice on. A few people suggested that, but it doesn't really seem to make sense. Surely a medical student would have access to cadavers that they could practice on rather than just taking some random dog. I mean, if they got caught doing that, they could probably wave goodbye to a medical career. It was even suggested that this might be the work of an aspiring serial killer. I think even that's a little bit more plausible than it being a medical student, but still, that theory makes no sense. It'd be so risky to kidnap someone's dog and operate on them when they could probably just go to a shelter and get a dog of their own to do that on. Unless a shelter checks up on dogs at rehomes after they leave, no one would probably be any the wiser. And even if they did check up on the dog, the owner could probably just say it died of natural causes. It's possible that some sick individual did this because they just got a kick out of it for whatever reason, but the fact that the dog was returned seems to suggest against this. Unless this was some kind of warning to OP, the dog being returned after makes it seem like whatever happened wasn't intentional, or at least that whoever was involved had some level of empathy towards the dog. The least nefarious theory I can think of is that the dog just somehow accidentally got injured, possibly by attempting to jump over the fence. That would explain the wounds on his abdomen, and that maybe a neighbour saw that and just decided to take him to the vets to get him stitched up. Maybe they were just a good Samaritan and didn't want credit for doing a good deed. But even if that was the case, you'd think they'd at least leave an anonymous note to let OP know what happened, so at least he doesn't worry. There is a possibility that OP made the story up. They linked photos of their dog after he came back from the vets, which showed the stitches, so something happened. But maybe the dog had some kind of necessary operation, and OP just took a photo of him after and made up the rest for internet points. The timeline is pretty suspicious. Unless OP was away from home for longer than they recalled, whatever happened very quickly, but it's not impossible. A few users, some claiming to have veterinary training, believe the story was fabricated for a few reasons. Generally that the story is just a bit hard to believe. But I didn't see any solid holes that would prove that OP is lying, so who knows? OP posted an update that has since been removed by moderators, stating that police are looking into this and that they're not allowed to say much, but there are possible leads on the dog being abducted or harmed, then brought back to the yard, and 3 cars were identified as potentially being involved. Assuming this isn't a hoax, it sounds like someone really did set out to hurt the dog, or OP threw their dog, for some unknown reason. OP also mentioned that they've been doxxed after posting about the incident, which is pretty awful. At least the dog is doing okay and is currently staying with OP's parents, away from the area. User NeverFinishMy, we'll call him Nev, was pretty active on Reddit at one point, posting in communities centred around games and clothing, amongst other things. 2 years ago, he posted that he was about to try weed for the first time, then his next post was afterwards, where he said that he really enjoyed it and wanted more. Sometime after, he made a post asking for advice on LSD, stating that after trying weed for the first time, he wanted something bigger and better. You can tell just from this post that he's not prepared, which is a sign of what's to come. One comment summed it up perfectly. "Is it stronger than weed?" he says as he becomes the wallpaper in the room. He didn't update the post with a description of how it went, but he did comment on other posts in the meantime, so he at least survived it. The next post he made himself was on r/drugs, where he asked for tips in preparation for him trying datura the next day. I'm sure you can predict where this is going. Datura is a powerful and dangerous hallucinogen. While most people would strongly advise against even trying it, some people do take it recreationally. It has killed many people in the past and caused others serious damage, physically and mentally. A quote shown on tripsitter.com gives you an idea of how potent it is. Datura is a 72-hour psychedelic nightmare from which you may never recover. Anyway, the user's post explained how he'd got hold of a datura plant and was extremely excited to try the seeds. In this post, he clarifies that it was only 2 weeks ago when he first tried weed, which is a pretty sudden escalation. Many of the comments were advising against him trying it, and he updated the post to say he would be doing further research after reading the comments, but his second update revealed that he decided to go ahead and take the seeds anyway. At that point, he wasn't feeling much, but his incoherent post shortly after showed that it eventually kicked in. He commented on a picture of a frog in r/frogs saying DNONOO green, then made a post on the Flat Earth is Real subreddit, which could have said help please search or something similar, it's hard to make out. Then he replied to a comment by a user named Hot saying hot stop too hot. And his final interaction on Reddit was a comment on a post about selling clothes on a subreddit he'd been active on before. The comment read, "Come so quick," accompanied by a link to Google Maps that appeared to be a search for how to send location to someone. And then he vanished. The account has been inactive ever since. While he could have just abandoned the account, most who interacted with him seem to think that he is dead. His friend posted about him on the Dead Redditors subreddit, assuming he died after seeing his post history and not receiving a response from him since then. Though this user didn't know Nev in real life, only over Reddit, so it's not like it's confirmed that he died. As I said, he could have just abandoned the account, or it could even all be a hoax. This is very similar to user Flip and Flop, who vanished after taking datura 3 years ago. He also made a few incoherent posts and comments before he disappeared. Maybe Nev was recreating the Flip and Flop situation after seeing that become a popular mystery. Despite cannabis being known as a gateway drug, people don't generally try it for the first time, then take datura 2 weeks later. That doesn't prove this is all fabricated, but it is a little hard to believe. I have no idea what it's like to be under the influence of datura, so for all I know, maybe that does make you do something like this, but it just seems a bit convenient that Nev posted in 4 different subreddits. Could this just have been to ensure more people saw what was happening and have more eyes on what would later become a Reddit mystery? I looked at a few trip reports on the datura subreddit, and it seems that posting in various communities or just posting online in general wouldn't be too unusual if you were under the influence of datura. Nev was active on Reddit for around a year before this happened. It wasn't just a throwaway account, and the Dead Redditors post shows that he did interact with other people online, unless that was just him on an alt account. Considering he was active for so long before, you'd think that he'd maybe drag all this out a little bit if it was a hoax. As I said, people who try weed for the first time don't typically tend to try datura 2 weeks later. Maybe this is one of those situations that sounds made up but is actually real. It's just impossible to tell looking through Reddit posts. But if it is real, it's really sad. Nev was only 17 at the time of his first post on the Saplings subreddit. I'm not about to demonise every recreational drug, but if there's any lesson to be learnt from this, stay away from datura. The final mystery we'll discuss isn't quite so disturbing, but it's certainly baffling. A post on nonmurdermysteries read, "Back in university in 2011, my friend and I walked into our lecture just as the professor from the previous lecture was packing up. We sat in the front and observed him as he packed up his notes. My friend noticed that he wore 2 watches on his left wrist and asked him about it. He came over to us and talked about it in a hurried manner. He challenged us to figure out why he wears them. Here are the pieces of information we got from him before he left. We thought that maybe he was keeping track of another time zone. He said that is incorrect. In fact, one of the watches does not even work and he's stuck at 4:20. Has nothing to do with weed, we asked. And the other watch runs normally. The working watch is in our current time zone. It is not to keep track of another time zone. He said that there is a functional purpose to this, and the watch isn't there for sentimental value. He taught mathematics, so it might be some kind of math puzzle. That's all we got from him. Not long after that, we never saw this professor again and never caught his name. It doesn't seem to me that he would constantly wear 2 watches around just to mess with students. I believe his word when he says there is a functional use for it. We never figured out what it is, and it still puzzles us to this day. We don't even have a theory on what it could be. What do you think? We're stumped. Why would a professor wear 2 watches? My guess would have been that it was to keep track of another time zone, but if it isn't that, what could it be? One comment suggested that it could be used as a stopwatch. If the broken watch was set to the current time, then after some length of time, the working watch could be compared to the broken watch to figure out how much time had passed. That sounds like the next most plausible guess, but OP implied that the broken watch is always stuck at 4:20, so it wouldn't be altered to set to the current time. And why not just get a stopwatch instead? Surely that'd be easier than constantly wearing 2 watches around. Another comment mentioned that an analog watch can be used as a compass. It wouldn't necessarily be needed on a campus, but it would be a functional purpose. I can totally see some people doing this or keeping certain survival items on them just in case they ever ended up in a situation where they'd need it. But you only need 1 working watch to use as a compass. That wouldn't explain the purpose of the second watch, which didn't even work. Another comment proposed that the working watch was too big, so the professor used the broken watch to keep it on his wrist, or that the broken watch was just used to keep his sleeve out of the way. But if the working watch was too big, why not just get it altered? It just seems so unnecessary to wear 2 watches for that reason. Same goes if the broken watch was used to keep his sleeve out of the way. Why not just roll his sleeve up? There were a couple of other comments that related to sentimental value, such as the watch being set at 4:20 because 4:20 was an important time to the professor, but OP already made it clear that there is a functional purpose and it's not just for sentimental value. I searched Google for reasons why someone would wear 2 watches, and it's actually not totally uncommon. But the majority of people who do would do so to either track the time in a different time zone, for sentimental reasons, for good luck, or because they think it's fashionable. None of the reasons I came across really seemed to fit the information that we have here. The professor said there was a functional reason, so we can rule out it being a fashion statement. The broken watch could be used to remember a time, but I can't think of a reason for that wouldn't be sentimental. And if it was a time that was worth wearing 2 watches to remember, you'd think it'd be ingrained in his memory at this point. Wearing 2 watches on the same wrist is probably not a good idea, as they're both more likely to get damaged if they're knocking into each other all day. I'd find that pretty annoying too, but I guess if it's something that he's done for years, he's probably used to it at this point. I'm sure all this probably has a very basic explanation, but I'm stumped. The only possibility that is kind of plausible given the information that we have is one user's suggestion that this was simply to get people to make conversation with him. Maybe it is as simple as that and we're all just overthinking what the functional purpose might be. And that is totally something I could see a professor doing, wearing 2 watches to make people curious enough to ask him about it, then leaving them with a mystery to ponder on that really has a very simple explanation. And if it's not that, I can only imagine that it's some kind of personal obscure reason that makes sense to the professor but no one else. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts and theories in the comments. Do you have an explanation for any of these mysteries that I didn't consider? If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Huge thank you to my patrons, whose names are on screen now. I really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Thursday in a new video.